أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي صدق الله العلي العظيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Okay, so today we continue with the second lesson on the 25 Prophets course that we've started. Now, I've just got one or two questions here initially just to consider. Normally we talk about the Arabian Peninsula and especially where occupied Palestine, Libya, Lebanon, Syria is as the Middle East. Now, it's about how nomenclature is used, because what this does is it claims as if the West is what Western Europe is, and then the East happens to start from Turkey going up and all the countries up of Turkey, north of it. So in other words, the old Eastern communist bloc of countries going across. Now that becomes all of the East. So the Middle East happens to be in that sort of nomenclature, the term that's used. But what I've been picking up recently is this move to another nomenclature, which is to say, actually, this area of Arabia is actually West Asia. So it's flipping it around because I think it's creating a sense that Asia is a continent on its own, and the Arabian Peninsula forms part of West Asia, and where Russia is more or less Central Asia, and then East Asia would be what they term as the Far East. So I think it's quite an important distinction, and it's something to think about, that maybe we should also call it West Asia, although we're so used to the Middle East that even when we talk, we use that term. Then the second question was, if you remember, the prophets, all these 25 prophets all happen to be in this area called West Asia, right? So all of them happen to be sent either to what is present-day Iraq or Syria or southeastern part of Turkey or Lebanon, occupied Palestine or Jordan or even Egypt. So that area happens to have had these 25 prophets. Now, we did mention in the earlier slide as well that there were some 125,000 prophets that were sent. And we don't know who they are and what their names are and where they were sent to, but suffice to say that every community or nation that existed from day one of human existence on the earth, they have received, prophets sent to them. And essentially, every person that was born in humanity has got what is called a fatra. Fatra meaning a clean soul, and it is only their parents and the society that they live in that makes them into whether a Muslim, Christian, or whatever else. So, in that sense, what's happened in this part of West Asia with all these prophets coming is essentially the same thing that has happened in South America or Australasia or even in the Far East. Wherever communities were established, prophets were sent for guidance, and they received similar treatment to what is described in these 25 great people that we're going to be discussing. Oh, so having said that, we now come on to Hazrat Adam alayhi salam. Now, the miraculous births of humanity start off with the first two, which is Adam and Hawa, both who were created from clay and in heaven. And we'll talk about their story in a short while. So that was the first birth, as it were, from nothing, from clay. And this creation was created. And then we have Isa alayhi salam, much more later. He also had a miraculous birth in that he had a mother called Maryam, but he didn't have a father. And there was also some conception that took place, and he was miraculously born without having a father figure in his family set up as such. And we'll talk about that also when we come to Isa alayhi salam. Okay, so what I've done in this chart, I've tried to simplify it a bit more. Earlier, I showed you that green one, which was quite sort of very like maybe sometimes difficult to read and pick up. But this one shows it a bit easier. So Adam alayhi salam and his wife, I've indicated in yellow, wife Hawa, he had, according to the Quran, two sons, Qabil and Habil, which is Cain and Abel as we know them. And those two are mentioned in the Quran, but not by name. And then Sheth is the third son, and there were other sons that Adam and Hawa had. And each of these progeny of Adam and Hawa had a twin birth. In other words, there's a boy and a girl as twins that were born as part of the marriages that they took place. And that's how the whole of humanity sort of emerged and started off. Then we go from Sheth, we go down about 3 generations to Al-Yarid, and then his son was Idris, the second prophet that we're going to study. Then we go further 2 generations down and we come to Noah, and then Noah had 3 sons, and then we look at Hud and Saleh. So perhaps today we'll try and do 5 if we can. If not, we'll stop wherever the time allows. All right, so let's move on to Adam alayhi salam. Now, how I've structured these notes, so I've tried to make it comprehensive, but at the same time very short. So if you look at Adam alayhi salam, he's had 25 different mentions in the Quran by name. So in other words, there are 25 ayat in the Quran scattered all over, talking about the story that I'm going to be giving you a very nutshell view of just now. Now, what this table also shows us is the date of birth, more or less. Now, circa, C-I-R-C-A, is that C in front, means approximately around about 6,000 BC, before the birth of Christ. And he died about 5,000 BC, which is he lived for about 1,000 years, which is quite a long period. But him, as well as Noah, as we're going to study, also lived, like he lived for 950 years. So 1,950 was like the ballpark for that age and era. And then where he's buried, if we know for sure, then I've put it down in this particular cell. But if it's unknown, and many of them were unknown, so therefore we don't know, and maybe we don't need to know as well, because that's not really so important as what their life and their mission was about. Then in the third and fourth row, I've got which area they lived in. In Adam alayhi salam, he started off in Jannah, and then they sent to earth, and he passed away on earth. Right? And the people that he served as his ummah was initially, because he was the first couple, obviously it was his sons and daughters, and then children, grandchildren, that formed the community that he was addressing his message to. In terms of spouse or spouses, he had one spouse, which is Hawa, and the children, they say, at least we know of 3 sons plus another unknown number of children. Okay. Now let's talk about the story itself. So essentially, Allah had in heaven at the time angels that were created already, and they were made to only worship Allah. They were pure beings. They didn't question anything. They simply obeyed Allah in everything that was asked of them, and they were there made solely for the worshipping of Allah. Then Allah created from clay of the earth a second creation, which is mankind, and he created man to be what is called a khalifa, or a vicegerent, or a kind of a person that will lead the way on earth. Right? And this person will have knowledge, knowledge in a bigger sense, where he'll know the names of things, he'll know how to behave, he'll have language, etc. And this creation, the important thing about this creation is it had choice, right? It had the choice of choosing either this or that, one path or the other. So this was different from what the angels were. The angels were like one track in terms of just only made to worship. And then after he created the form of the human being, he allowed a soul to be breathed into the body of clay, and a human being emerged, and Adam was then created. Now, he was the most refined of creations. Right? He could use logic, he could use reason, he had a rational brain, a mind of his own. And the other significant thing is he could use language to communicate. Right? So all these things put together made him far above that of any other creation. Creations that were on the earth already, like the animals, or other creations like the angels. And then there were the third category of a creation, which is the jinns. Now, the jinns, you have the good type and an evil type. Now, one of the good jinns happened to be Iblis at one stage, but after man was created and the angels were asked to bow down, and even the good jinns were asked to bow down to Adam to show their subservience to this new creation that Allah made. Iblis was one sort of jinn that backed off and said, I don't want to bow down, because how can I bow down to something different? And he felt fire was more important than clay. So he refused. And from this, we learn that jinns obviously have a choice. And essentially, he was the rebellious jinn. So he turned his sort of future around by as a result of having pride. Then after that, Hawa was created and given as a companion to Adam. So they were, as it were, husband and wife. And Iblis was given a reprieve to allow him the opportunity to mislead people, but for the appointed time. But in the end, he knew that hell will be his final destination. Now, Iblis started his work of trying to, influence and convince and use the whispers of Shaitan to Adam and Hawa, and told them that, you know what, you can go to this tree that Allah has forbidden you from going to. And if you do eat from that fruit of the tree, you will receive immortality. In other words, you'll be able to live forever. And who wanted to not live forever in Jannah? But essentially, Adam and Hawa didn't fall for the tricks of Shaitan initially, but gradually with time, they kind of fell into the trap. They ate of that forbidden fruit, but they felt remorse for this disobedience that they indulged in. And then they asked forgiveness from Allah, and Allah forgave them. But as a consequence of that, Adam and Hawa, although forgiven, but they were sent down to earth to live the rest of their lives. Right, and this time, obviously, they had to fend for themselves. It was nothing like Jannah where everything was provided. Either they had to work hard and do things for themselves. Right, and then the story goes on when he had these sons. Now, the Quran mentions only two of them, which is Cain or Kabil and Abel or Habil. And at one stage, both these sons were asked to do a sacrifice. They were both involved in different kind of jobs. Habil's sacrifice was accepted because he did it sincerely, whereas Kabil sacrifice wasn't accepted, and therefore, out of jealousy, he killed Habil. So Cain killed Abel, as it were. Now, the amount of generations that came out of this particular union, two famous Islamic historians, Ibn Kathir and Ibn al-Jawzi, mention about 20 sets of twins from a number of the children of Adam alayhi salam, each consisting of a boy and a girl. And the third one was Sheth, which means the gift of Allah, but he was not mentioned in the Quran at all, and yet he is the person from whom the progeny of all the prophets sort of came out from. Okay, so that essentially is, I've summarized quite a bit in one slide, is life in a nutshell. Now we go on to the more important part, which is what are the lessons we learn from Adam alayhi salam's story. And I've covered the angels, what they're made of and what they do, and they're absolutely pure. Jinns are also made of smokeless flame, and they've got free will, and man is made of clay. So we've covered all that. Now, man is the only, like jinn, is capable of doing both good and evil, right? If good in nature, then man's stature rises to above that of angels, even better than the angels. But if evil, he can be lower than that of animals and the shayateen and all the like, right? So man has got this propensity of choice, and he can end up in either of, either in a line of doing good or in the line of doing evil. And the relationship between man and Iblis is one of a perpetual confrontation of good versus evil. And this is going to be his life's course. He's going to continue to mislead and misguide us, and we need to be careful of his whisperings and the evil desires and inclinations that he instills in our hearts and minds. And what obviously triumphs will depend on how we choose to lead our lives. So his downfall came about through pride and arrogance. And we need to be careful of those two qualities which can seep into human beings as well. Also, we need to keep our egos and our pride in check at all times. And the other thing we learn from the surah is when a command is given by Allah, for instance, don't go near that tree, but you can do everything else, then that is like the Sharia. In other words, that is what is allowed and not allowed. So what we should do is just accept and follow it if you believe in Allah and the fact that He knows all and He's guiding you. Right? So Sharia rulings are there for our benefit and our guidance, and we should just take heed. And if we ignore it, it's at our own peril because there's a consequence to not obeying the Sharia, which we know there's a life after death, and there's Jannah and Jahannam waiting for us. All right, so then the other part of the story amplifies the first act of rivalry between two brothers and their subsequent murder of one just out of mere jealousy. Now we get this jealousy coming out even in people. And what's strange is that this is Adam alayhi salam is a Nabi of Allah, and he had children, and all of them were not the same. Right? So from that also we take a lesson that even all of us as heads of households, we know that in our families as well, we have all kinds of people, all kinds of personalities, you know, different people with their minds of their own. So some will be sometimes guided and some will not be, but it's it's a package that we have and we need to make the most out of it. Right. So here it also shows that a man as noble as a prophet of as Adam had sons of the nature that were like that one was able to kill somebody else. So in the beginning of time, as it was, so it's quite strange. But these are essentially the nutshell kind of stories we learn out of Adam alayhi salam's. Okay, let's move on to Idris. Now, Idris, from here, I'll try and show you a map with each prophet as well, so you'll know more or less where he lived. And so he was probably born in a place near Babylon in this area here in southern Iraq. And this is the route that he traveled in his life. And at the end, he ended up in a place in Egypt called Babylonia, Memphis. And this was his sort of journey through life. Right? He lived for only 83 years. So imagine somebody having 1,000 years of life before you living 83, which is like the norm of today. And the next prophet also having 950 years. So it's kind of, it's different. It's not that every prophet is the same. Right? We all know where he traveled and moved to. This we pick up from some of the historical writings. So essentially, he was in those three areas of Babylon, Palestine, and Egypt. And Mesopotamia is the name given to this area between these two major rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. Now, the Quranic ayat, the mentions of Idris in the Quran is only two short ayah which are listed here. The first one says, "A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, wa Ismail wa Idris wa Dhul Kifl," mentioning three prophets by name: the Ismail, Idris, and Dhul Kifl. Right? Kullun, all of them, minas sabirin. They were all showed this one quality of extreme sabr, patience out no matter what. Right? So that's the one quality that comes out that Idris had. Right? The second ayah says, "Wathkur fil kitabi Idris," so mention in the book the case or the matter of Idris. Innahu, surely he was of the Siddiq and the Nabi. Siddiq was the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, also his nickname, Al-Amin and Siddiq, right? He was a man of truth. In other words, he was absolutely honest in everything he said and he did. And his honesty was also one of the sincere type. So he's sincerely honest, right? So Siddiq is a very profound quality which Idris had. And obviously he was a Nabi, which means being a prophet, he had a lofty stature. In other words, he was not an ordinary man. He was a man guided by God, chosen by Allah, and led a pure life all his life through. So from these three qualities, and that's all we know about him. No other verse in the Quran talks about Idris alayhi salam. So we take it from these three sort of phrases. He had a lot of sabr, he was a Siddiq and a Nabi. Right? So he was essentially a man of truth and sincerity, given a high stature. And where the corruption comes in is the fact that the followers of Qabil, three or five generations before, started a whole lot of corruptive practices in their lives and amongst the community he lived in. So he fought against this corruption of these descendants of Qabil, some of his predecessors. Right? He was known also to be the first who have learned how to write, to use a pen. So he also had knowledge of astronomy and mathematics. Now, what do we learn from this lesson of Idris? Because we don't really know who he preached to and how hard it was or whatever, but we know that he had patience. So, in other words, the people of his time gave him a hard time, and he only survived it because of his patience. So, basically, he stood for what is right. So, no matter what the obstacle or force not wanting you to do it, he still went and did the right thing. Right? So, that was the choice he made all his life. Secondly, about man's corruptible nature. Now, how you build immunity against corruption is firstly, you need to have, or even me, all of us have to have sincerity and high moral scruples. Right? Those are the two qualities that we mentioned of Idris. And how we build that up is through regular prayer and regular fasting. Those are things that keep our sincerity in place and our morality also intact. Some other teachings of Prophet Idris, some 5 interesting sort of quotations from him. One is, happy is he who looks at his own deeds and appoints them as pleaders to his Lord. In other words, on the day of judgment, it's best that you come with so many good deeds that collection of good deeds is going to be pleading for you to say, oh Allah, grant me access into Jannah. Right? So let it be that we've got a lot of good deeds that overweighs our evil deeds, and therefore we will enter Jannah. The second one is about shukr, which we've learned in the Surah Al-Fatiha, Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, all praise and gratitude. Right? None can show better gratitude for Allah's favors than he who shares them with others. In other words, if you are given a blessing or a bounty or a ni'mat from Allah, what you need to do is don't hoard it and keep it to yourself. You must share it with others. So whether it's wealth, whether it's your good health and you're helping others who are sickly, in any way, whatever way you can help others, you need to do it. Right? So that's the way of showing gratitude for Allah, what He has given you by sharing it with others. The third one is also quite interesting because we know about envy and jealousy from already the Adam alayhi salam story, where do not envy people for what they have, as they will only enjoy it for the short while. Meaning that no matter what blessing Allah has blessed any individual or family with, that blessing is there just for the short while. It can happen that maybe even before they die, that blessing will be withdrawn from them, or sometimes the blessing will be withdrawn, or there's consequence to that blessing because they will be answerable for all those blessings also that they have afterwards, right? But what we need to do is don't envy people for what they have. If you see somebody having more than you, say Alhamdulillah, and move on. Don't have jealousy and hatred as a result of what they have and you don't have. Right? Then the fourth one is, you indulges in excess will not benefit from it. So in other words, if you are a wasteful, spendthrift kind of guy, person that wastes, time and money and everything else, if you indulge in that, unfortunately, it's going to catch up with you and you're not going to benefit from it at all. Your whole life will go. Of course, it won't be on the Ihdina Sirat al-Mustaqim. Right? And the last one is, the real joy of life is to have not knowledge, but wisdom. In other words, the issue of how you use your knowledge, how you apply it in your life, that is what wisdom is about. It's not just acquiring book knowledge and having a degree or two and thinking you're educated, but no, real education comes where you become wise as a result of having that education. So I think those are very good advices from the Prophet Idris alayhi salam. Right, let's move on to the third prophet, Nuh alayhi salam. Now, Nuh lived in this area of the Tigris Euphrates, in other words, Mesopotamia region. He was born in the Kufa area. He preached and taught and lived in this area. And then Mount Judy is where, at the end of the flood, that ark or that big boat that he was asked to construct actually landed on Mount Judy after the flood was over. So this is his sort of terrain. We don't know much more about in between what happened, where it was. The important thing is, they say he preached to the affluent people of this region because it was a very fertile region. So probably people had a lot of farmlands and livestock and the like because along rivers you always have good, very healthy greenery and lush growth of things. So fruits, vegetables, all that was probably in abundance. Now, with that abundance comes affluence, and with affluence comes the fact that it's, that people develop pride to think that they know it all and they've got it all and they're blessed and Allah will continue blessing them. Right? So with the result, they go astray. And then when Nuh was like sort of preaching or teaching them, they mocked him, they derided him, they insulted him, they made him go to hell, actually, because if you look at 950 years of trying to teach people goodness and a good way of life, and you don't succeed with people, then you can imagine what kind of a personality you have to be to withstand that kind of negativity. For those of you who are in branding and communications and marketing, or even just in business, in salesmanship, you know how hard it is to sell an item, or how hard it is to convince people to buy or to do something differently, right? Now imagine this prophet for 950 years, he battled with the community he was in. So in any case, at the end, he asked Allah for advice. No, and Allah's under his command. He didn't know anything about carpentry. Allah basically commanded him to build an ark, a big, huge boat that could keep people and animals and a whole lot of other things on it in preparation for a flood that was going to come. Now, when he was building this ark, also the people around him mocked him. They said, you were a prophet. How you became a carpenter? And why are you building an ark? Like they didn't, I mean, for them, it was like the physical thing that, how stupid can you be? You're living on land. Why are you building such a big boat? Right? So, in any case, he continued, he built it. And then when the flood waters came, they came from the sky and from the ground. It emerged from both sides. And there was so much of water that he found his one son, on the one side. And he said, "Come, son, join us on the boat, then you'll be saved." And the son said, "No, I won't join you. I think I'll just go to a high piece of land, near this mountain, and I'll be saved. So I don't need you guys." So he rejected. And unfortunately, his wife was also one of them that didn't sort of go with what he had as a mission in life, was divinely guided. So in any case, both mother and son died in the flood, and this was the great flood. Now, here again in this story, what we learn is that sometimes a great prophet like Nuh alayhi salam would preach for 950 years. Imagine in his own family, right there, his own wife and his son were of a different kind. They didn't want to accept this message from him. Right? Now, he obviously had a very strong, indomitable spirit and a perseverance at another level. I mean, it's just mind blowing what kind of personality he should have been to withstand all this abuse over 950 years. Right? And what also happens in society when you have rich people, affluent people, they try to dominate and use their muscle, and they influence people to join them and become as corrupt as they are. And right now, if you find that if we find that in our communities, what we need to do is stand up against this if these rich, wealthy people are wrong and they're abusive. And always be consistent with what you believe to be the right thing. And stay with it. Don't change course and stay with it till the very end. Right? Just this is what Noah's sunnah or practice is showing us, that this is what we need to be. Very upright, morally, with values that we stand and a conscience that will guide us throughout life. Right, so we must have strong metal, both spirit and resilience, and never give up on a cause. Okay. Right, now the next two prophets happen to be about camels and sand dunes, the Ad and the Samud people. So I just thought I'll give you some of these little facts about a camel. It's a very, truly an amazing creation of Allah. You get two types, the dromedary, which is the one-humped version that you get in Arabia, and the Bactrian camel, which is with two humps, which you get in Central Asia. Right? Now, normally, their fur and their hide is very shaggy, so it serves two functions, both for heat and for cold, because the desert can be very hot and very cold in one 24-hour period. Right? They've also got very wide hooves, so they can walk easily through soft sand. So while me and you might battle, but a camel is very sturdy. It can, literally put its foot down on the sand and maintain its balance. And with you on top of it or with goods on top of it, it can do it. It's also called the ship of the desert because, these were the cargo carriers of the day. I mean, in the deserts and if you look at the Silk Route, the trade that happened from the east to the west at the time, all were done on camels because they were the very able-bodied, strong, able to do multiple terrains. Then there's a misconception about what's in the hump of a camel. Many people thought it was water because the thing is that it can survive for many days without water. So, but that's a misconception. Actually, what's in the hump is energy-rich fat that saves the body of the camel from overheating, and it's a protection because the sun's rays is from the top, and it survives for longer periods without food, and it can go a week or two or more without water, and even without food it can actually manage to survive for several months without food because it draws that energy stored as fat in the body. Right, and it can even survive a 40% weight loss and then drink up to 145 liters of water in one drinking session. And all this is just nice to know, but the main thing I was coming to is this last bullet point because this is of relevance to the next prophet. Right? The amazing thing about a camel is it's got two sets of eyelashes on each eye, and on each eye it's got three eyelets to protect their eyes from sand and windstorms. So in other words, if there's a windstorm and you are there with the camel, you need to cover yourself from head to toe because sand that's blowing at a speed of 60 kilos or whatever is so sharp, like biting stones, like small stones being flung at your cheeks and your hands, and any exposed part of your body will feel the impact of blowing sand at that speed. Whereas a camel can stand in that sandstorm and survive, and he can even see because it's got that one eyelid that comes over its eye and protects it from sand entering the eye at all. So he can still see, and yet it's protected from the sand that's, flying all over at that time. So I think this is the important part about a camel and what it can do, and it's part of a survival strategy that Allah has bestowed or blessed this animal with. Okay, so with that introduction about the camel, let's just do one more prophet. I know time is up, but I'll just take about 5 minutes more. Let's look at the next prophet is Hud alayhi salam or Ibn. He lived for about 70 years. He lived in the southern part of the Arabian Peninsula between Yemen and Saudi Arabia today, in a place called Ahqaf. Ahqaf means sand dunes. There's a lot of sand dunes in that area. In other words, it's solid desert. The empty quarter is actually only desert. Nothing survives there. Right? No one even lives there. And you go further south, there's a lot of sand dunes, and this is Surah Ahqaf is the one that talks about the story. Right? Don't confuse Ahqaf with Surah Al-Kahf, which is, which we read on Fridays, which is the story about the cave and those seven sleepers and the rest of it. Right? Now, Hud was sent to this people of the Ad, and the Ad lived in this area of Ahqaf. And they were famous for building magnificent structures in lofty towers, right, in the rocks. In other words, wherever there were rocks, they could carve into the rocks using the implements in the hands of the day, but amazing how they were able to get into the rock and carve rooms and, you know, everything that they needed to survive inside a rock so they could live under the cover of a rock with a little cave kind of opening as a door. And but in any case, they did these amazing structures, which if you were some of you might have visited Petra in Jordan, which is a standing sort of testament to these kind of formations that these people were able to build. This is now 3, 4, 500 years even before Petra, right? But they were able to build it basically with their bare hands and with a few basic tools that they had. I mean, there were no fancy drills and excavators and bulldozers and the like. I mean, they carved it literally through and they made. So, in any case, when they built these structures, this kind of amazing feat bred a sense of arrogance about themselves, that they felt they were like it. They've arrived, they were the best builders and architects of the area, and they could do what no one else could do. But Hood came to them, preached to them, tried to teach them, and they just refused to accept his guidance. Then at the end, how did they get destroyed? Through a simple thing like strong winds that Allah raged in succession for 8 days and 7 nights. In other words, for one solid 7, 8 day period, the way the winds gushed, they were just simply dropped down like dominoes, like, and they fell like eaten up palm trees, just down. And what was left is only those rock carvings to show that there was once a civilization here. It happened to be the Ahqaf of the Hud. Now, what the surah teaches us is our achievements in life, no matter how amazing they are nothing in terms of the grand scheme of things without the belief in one God and the day of judgment. So, as in essence, what we are here for is for another purpose. We can build structures to make our lives easy and all the rest of it, but essentially what we're here for is for ibadah and to be the servant and the abd of the Rabb, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And obviously, arrogance, pride, and wealth, once it seeps into any nation, these three things are sure things to ensure that that community or civilization will be on the decline and one day will become annihilated. May Allah save us from this kind of annihilation, because sometimes when we live, even in South Africa, when we have ample and maybe more than sufficient for our needs, it tends to breed in us a kind of an arrogance where we think we don't need to read Salah, we don't need to make dua, we don't need to connect with society, meet with people and help people. If we become like aloof in our own ivory towers and we forget about the communities and the needs around us, then we can become like the people of Ahqaf, where one day Allah can just take us away off the map of the earth to an earthquake, to a hurricane, to rains, floods, whatever. He's got manifold ways of destroying nations. And when we get destroyed, then Allah will just make way for a better community that will serve Him coming after us. So let's hope and pray that Allah saves us from this kind of outcome, because we need to take the ibrah or the lesson out of all these people and the messages they came with, and how we need to sort of keep our lives along the straight path without being diverted and being tempted by shaitan. Okay, we'll stop at that point with wal asr. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Wal asr. Innal insana lafi khusr. Illa alladhina amanu wa amilu salihat wa tawasaw bil haqq wa tawasaw bis sabr.